My name is Emily. I'm an educator here at the Nature Institute, and I'm here today to talk about one of my favorite winter outdoor activities, which is making maple syrup. So when you think about maple syrup, most people think about New England, Vermont, Canada, but actually you can tap maple trees and make syrup even as far south as here in the southern portion of Illinois. So I'm going to show you our sugar maple tree, a little bit of the equipment that you can use to tap it, and show the process of how it's done. So if you're interested in maybe trying to tap some trees of your own, or you're just curious about how the whole thing works, stay with us and we'll get into all of that. So first of all, we're going to need our tree. We're looking out here, and right in front of us there's this huge tree with a very rounded top, and that is our sugar maple. And I know that because I happen to know that that's our sugar maple, but also the shape of the tree is a really big giveaway, even in wintertime. So now we're going to walk a little bit closer and I'll tell you a little bit more about other tips and tricks you can use to identify sugar maples in the field. Of course, one of the easiest ways to identify any tree is by its leaves, if you know the leaves. So the sugar maple has a leaf that has 5 points and kind of a smooth, rounded bottom and edges. And it'll be familiar to you if you've ever seen the flag of Canada. Canada, maple syrup, sugar maple trees. So that's a good way to remember it. So if you come out earlier in the year, in the summer or the fall, you can look and you can find the tree with these leaves growing on it, and then you know that's your sugar maple. Of course, in the fall, sugar maple trees are really known for their colors. You get really beautiful yellows and reds, which is why people go on those, leaf drives through New England. So that can be a good way to find it as well. So if you're doing it when the leaves are still on, you can just find your trees, mark them, and then know to come back to them. But what if you haven't done that yet? It's okay. There are ways you can identify this tree, even in winter. So as we mentioned before, there's the shape of the tree. There's also how the bark looks. So it has, I'll grab this right here. This pretty smooth bark like this when it's younger and smaller. But then as the tree gets older, it gets really platey. There are these plates that kind of come off, peel away from the tree. That's another thing to look for. And then the other thing is the branching. So maples have what's called opposite branching, which means if you're looking at this twig, there are 2 smaller twigs coming off on opposite sides of the twig. And if you look through the tree, it does that all the way up on all of the branches. So when you have opposite branching like this, that's a good indication that it's a maple, ash, dogwood, or buckeye. So not just maples, but that is one of our clues. You can also learn what the buds look like, but that's a little more technical and we're not going to do that right now, but that's another way that you can know it as well. But coming back to the leaves, looking at the ground, we have these leaves that I recognize as our sugar maple leaves all over the ground around this tree, which is another clue telling us that this is our sugar maple. And finally, this tree actually has a handy sign that says sugar maple on it, which is also very helpful. But you don't usually get those out in the woods. So now we know this is definitely our sugar maple. We can tap it. So something to think about for yourself is the location of the tree as well. So this tree, we tap it frequently here at the Nature Institute, just about every winter for different programs and things. And this one is pretty easy to get to. In New England, where they have a much bigger sort of maple syrup making culture, you'll see old sugar maples planted along roads and outside of farmhouses, places like that that are easy to get to. We also have a lot of sugar maples here down along the creeks at TNI, but that's a pain to get to, so we don't really want to tap those. So that's definitely something to think about as well. So also you want to think about the placement of where you're going to put your taps. A good place to put them is on the southern side, how the sun warms them up. So I think we are going to probably tap right over here. But the question is, why are sugar maples able to make maple syrup like this? And there's a couple different things that go into this, which I'll touch on just a little bit. I won't get super into it. But basically, sugar maples are ideal for making maple syrup because of the sugar content of their sap, and also because of sort of the way the tree is structured and the way it works. So the sugar content of a sugar maple is typically 2 to 3% sugar in the sap, but it can even go up as high as 5%, and that does sort of vary based on where the tree is, and things like that. So you can also tap some other species of maple trees. You can tap a red maple, you can tap a box elder, but they will only have about half as much sugar content in the sap, so you're going to need more sap to make syrup. So for a sugar maple tree, you need 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So if you were tapping like a red maple, you might need half that. So that's a lot of sap, a lot of work. Double that. Not necessarily worth it. So I will go ahead and get into showing you how to tap this tree. So we have all of our supplies laid out right here. We got our drill. We have a bucket. This is actually a special bucket specifically made for maple syruping. It comes with its own lid. But you don't have to use that. You can use other kinds of buckets as long as they're food safe. You can actually even use a plastic milk jug. So there's a lot of different ways people get creative with it. But we're keeping it simple using these maple syrup buckets. And I also have, this is called the spile. And this is what's going to go into the hole in the tree the sap will come out of. This is going to help us pound the spile in, because this is sort of easily bent, so we don't want to just hammer this. And then we have our mallet to tap it in. So I'm going to assemble my things and bring them over here to the spot that I want to make my hole. So I picked this spot over here. I can see, looking around, there are a few holes from previous years that have healed up. A lot of people wonder, does it hurt the sugar maple tree to tap it? And no, it doesn't if you're doing it correctly. So your tree needs to be at least 10 inches in diameter before you even start tapping it. At that point, it can get 1 tap, and then as the trees get bigger, they can get up to 3 taps at a time. This tree is probably 60 or 70 years old, but trees do need to be at least 40 years old typically before you can even start tapping them. So if you had a tiny little maple tree that's that big, you're not going to want to tap that. That wouldn't be good for it. But we know this one is ready. All right, let's make the hole. We're going to put it in a little bit of an angle so that the sap will slide out pretty easily once we put the spile into it. All right, I'll get a little bit of sawdust out of there so it doesn't clog it. And so it's a pretty warm day. You can see this sap is already flowing out of this hole. The way that the sap flow works is something that's not even entirely understood by scientists yet, which I think is really interesting. But basically, there's a pressure differential within the tree that causes the sap to flow. And basically the sap is trying to flow out to a place of lower pressure. So the sap run, as it's called, when the sap is flowing the best, typically when there's freezing nights and then warmer days. So up north, that's gonna be around February and March. Here we're a little bit further south, so it'll be earlier, which is why we're starting now in January. There we go. All right. So when the sap comes out, like I said, it's only about 2 or 3% sugar. So it looks basically like water, and when you taste it, it kind of tastes like water too. It's gonna take a lot of boiling to get to the point where it's officially called maple syrup. That's not something we're gonna get in today, but for right now we can see the sap coming out. That's future maple syrup right there. So the lid on there, that'll keep things from falling into it. Hopefully keep bugs and animals out too. Sometimes they get in there and that all gets strained out at the end, and that's not the end of the world if you get a few bugs. So then we're gonna leave this. We'll cover it on here, and then we'll keep checking it over the next few days to see how much sap we've got. So thank you so much for joining us for how to tap a maple tree. Join us next time for more about the history and culture of maple syrup, and also how maple syrup is made from maple sap. See you next time.